A promise in the ashes. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. Do you believe that two broken hearts can ever truly heal together? Comment your thoughts below. Ibua accepted the task of caring for the widower's child, but no one knew that his own heart was just as shattered. Two destinies, scarred by grief, brought together by fate. But can love truly mend such deep wounds, or does the past still have debts to pay? Watch until the end. This story will move you to tears. The clock on the living room wall chimed 10:17 p.m. The rhythmic tick-tock of the second hand, a sound so insignificant until now, filled the sterile hospital corridor. For Dr. Elias Vance, each beat was a cruel reminder that time waits for no one. He stood there, the sterile linoleum disappearing beneath his feet. His mind was a battlefield of elation and terror as he clutched his phone, waiting for the next update from his medical team. The birth had started too early. Their baby girl was supposed to have weeks left in Lily's womb, but Destiny hadn't asked for permission. "Lily," he whispered her name, the sound a ragged echo in the air, thick with disinfectant and anticipation. He remembered how she'd held her belly that morning, smiling through the irregular contractions. "Everything's fine, my love," she had said, her eyes shining with the same tenderness that had captivated him years ago. "Our baby is just eager to meet the world." Now, only a cold door and a team of doctors separated him from her. Elias, a surgeon by profession, felt his legs give way and leaned against the wall. He had stood on the other side of that door countless times, clad in scrubs and a mask, offering reassurance to patients and their families. He had seen births become tragedies, and tragedies become miracles. But none of his long, grueling hours of training had prepared him for this. A nurse hurried past, her eyes a blank stare, a bad omen. When the operating room door finally swung open, something inside him screamed not to listen. The obstetrician appeared, his gaze downcast, shoulders slumped. Elias knew that look. There was only one reason a doctor would avoid eye contact. "Dr. Vance," the man said. Elias didn't realize he had been holding his breath until the pressure exploded in his head. "The baby?" he rasped, his voice unrecognizable. The doctor nodded. "Your daughter is fine." The words should have brought relief, but the absence of a second name made his heart skip a beat. "And Lily?" The silence was his answer. Elias stumbled backward, as if he could outrun the words that were about to come. He saw the doctor's lips move, forming words his brain refused to process. "Complications. A severe hemorrhage. We tried everything. I'm so very sorry." The air grew thick and sharp. "No." The word was a fragile thread of sound as his body recoiled against the cold wall. The floor seemed to tilt beneath his feet. "I am so sorry, Dr. Vance. This wasn't happening. Not to Lily. Not to him." But then, a baby's cry cut through the air, a cruel reminder of his new reality. She was gone. Lily, his Lily, would never meet the daughter she had dreamed of holding. Never again would she call him by the pet name she had invented. Never again would she look at him with those brown eyes that made him forget the world. The grief hit him like a violent wave, stealing the air from his lungs. His body trembled, but he couldn't move. A nurse approached, holding a small bundle in her arms. "Dr. Vance, your daughter." He looked at that tiny face, the delicate skin, the closed eyes, the fists clenched in a battle against a new world. She was the spitting image of her mother. Elias's chest tightened, a mix of overwhelming love and a despair he couldn't name. He should hold her. He should feel the warmth of his daughter against his chest and promise he would always be there. but all he could do was look away, pressing his fists to his eyes. I can't. The sound of his own sobs swallowed the rest of the sentence. Somewhere else in the hospital, another tragedy was unfolding. Clara Hayes felt her body go numb. The physical pain of childbirth no longer mattered. The pain in her chest consumed her completely. She looked at the empty bassinet next to her bed, a cruel reminder of what had been taken before it had even begun. The silence shattered her. She closed her eyes, hoping that when she opened them, it would all be a mistake. That a doctor would walk through the door and say there had been a mix-up, that her baby was fine. But no one came, and in the deafening silence of the hospital, two souls broke at the same time, unaware that in some future, they would find in each other a new reason to live. The house was no longer a home. Since Lily left, Elias felt that every wall had absorbed his grief, becoming silent witnesses to his ruin. The crib in the corner of the room was still assembled, but he avoided looking at it for too long. It hurt to face the reality that he should be there, with his wife, admiring their daughter together. Now, it was just him. And Ella. Never had saying her name hurt so much. He held the baby in his arms, trying and failing to calm her. She had been crying for over an hour, the sound filling every corner of the house, hammering in his head. But the crying wasn't hers alone. Elias felt his own pain overflowing, but he refused to let a sound escape. He swayed, trying to find a rhythm, anything that might help her sleep, but his hands trembled. He had no idea what he was doing. His voice came out hoarse, worn out from exhaustion. The baby wouldn't stop crying. He felt his own chest rise and fall irregularly, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The weight in his arms was becoming unbearable. I don't know what to do, he mumbled, his voice cracking. And then it came. The desperation broke through his barriers, and Elias's vision blurred. The tears he had been holding back for days finally fell. He held his daughter close, his sobs escaping uncontrollably. The baby cried, and he cried too. There, in the middle of the dark house, they both shared a pain neither of them could name. Days passed, but the pain did not subside. The clock seemed to move forward and stand still at the same time. Elias was exhausted. He didn't sleep more than 2 hours at a time, didn't eat properly, and could barely remember the last time he'd showered without having to rush out because Ella had started crying. The apartment, once organized and immaculate, was now in chaos. Piles of dirty bottles in the sink, diapers scattered on the sofa, clothes piled on chairs. The energy he once had to keep everything under control had evaporated. Messages from friends and colleagues filled his phone, but he didn't reply. The world kept spinning outside, but he no longer saw a point in being a part of it. That morning, his mother showed up unannounced. Elias? He was sitting on the sofa, holding his daughter who had finally fallen asleep. He didn't look up when his mother came in, but he felt the weight of judgment in the air. She surveyed the room with a hard stare. My God, this place is a mess. He closed his eyes. He didn't have the strength to argue. Where is the nanny? She asked, moving some clothes to sit next to him. Elias sighed, drained. I fired her. What? Why? His mother huffed, crossing her arms. She wanted to live here, Elias. The woman needed a job. He felt anger begin to bubble inside him. I don't need help. His mother stood, indignant. Look at you. Look at this house. You can't do it all alone. Something inside Elias snapped. I lost my wife and became a father at the same time, and you think this is just a mess? His voice echoed through the apartment, and for a second, everything was silent. The baby stirred in his arms, but miraculously didn't wake up. His mother sighed, running a hand over her face. Son, I don't want to hear it. Elias stood, feeling the rage and pain mingle. He couldn't be there anymore. He needed air. He needed to get out. Without another word, he grabbed his car keys and left. He didn't know where he was going until he parked in front of a small cafe he used to go to with Lily. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with baked bread hit him the moment he walked in, bringing a wave of memories. It was a mistake to be there. He was about to leave when he saw her, Clara. She was sitting alone at one of the tables near the window, holding a mug in her hands. Her eyes held a strange glint, something between melancholy and contained rage. Elias hesitated for a moment before approaching. Clara. She slowly looked up. Her eyes met his, and what came next was a sharp blow to his chest. So, Doctor, how was your vacation? Elias frowned, confused. Me? While you were moving on with your life, I was losing my son. The bitterness in her voice was a gut punch. Elias felt a knot form in his throat. He wanted to say something, but realized no words would be enough. Let me buy you a coffee. Clara let out a short, humorless laugh. And that's going to bring my son back? He didn't back down. No, but maybe we can share some of the pain. She was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed and pushed her chair back. Fine. Their conversation was a silent exchange of scars. Elias talked about Lily, about the delivery, about how his daughter's crying seemed like an echo of his own suffering. Clara talked about the emptiness, about the crib that was never used, about how every night, when she closed her eyes, she still felt the baby inside her. Even though she knew he wasn't there anymore, they didn't offer words of comfort to each other. There was no comfort for that. But there was something stronger, understanding. When Elias finally looked at the clock, he realized several hours had passed. Do you want to come to my place? He asked, hesitating. Clara raised an eyebrow. Why? He looked away. I don't know, but I don't want to go back alone. She watched him for a moment, then picked up her bag. Let's go. When they entered the apartment, Clara looked around. My God. Elias sighed. I know. It's a mess. She walked over to the sofa and picked up one of the dirty rags. It looks like a battlefield. He laughed without humor. Then, a soft sound broke the silence. The baby's crying. Elias went to the crib and picked her up. Clara watched him hold her, despite the fatigue on his face. She approached, hesitant. Can I hold her? Elias blinked, surprised. Then, slowly, he passed the baby into Clara's arms. She held her delicately, her eyes filled with something he couldn't decipher. And then, for the first time since it all began, Elias felt something different. It wasn't pain. It wasn't emptiness. It was something else. Something he didn't yet know how to name. But for the first time, it felt like a step out of the darkness. Comment below. Do you think Clara is doing the right thing by working for Elias? Or is it a recipe for more heartbreak? The house was still a battlefield, but now there were two people trying to hold it up. At first, Clara's presence was purely functional, a necessary support to alleviate Elias's burden. He hired her to take care of Ella, and she accepted because it was a job, because she needed a fresh start, because she had nowhere else to go. But from day one, there was something more in the way they looked at each other, something neither of them dared to name. Clara filled the spaces silently, without invading. She moved through the house without disturbing Elias's grief, yet she filled the voids he left behind. She tidied the kitchen without being asked, washed his clothes, and when he came back from the shower, a clean towel was always on the rack. She didn't talk much and didn't expect gratitude, perhaps because she was also broken, because she understood the weight of carrying a grief that no one saw. Elias, for his part, tried to ignore her. Not because he didn't respect her, but because he didn't want her there. Because unlike previous employees, Clara wasn't just a nanny, she was a mirror. And he still didn't know if he was ready to truly see himself. For the first few weeks, the dynamic between them was almost mechanical. Clara took care of the baby, Elias went to work, came back late, and went straight to his room. It wasn't a hostile environment, but there was no familiarity either. When Clara suggested he come home earlier to put Ella to sleep, he just shook his head. When she mentioned the mothers' group at the park, he let out a brief laugh, as if the idea were absurd. "I'm not a mother," he said one night, dropping his briefcase on the sofa. "But you're a father," Clara replied, without hesitation. Elias didn't answer. She didn't push it. She knew he needed time. But time wasn't always kind. It was late when Elias came home and found the living room shrouded in darkness. He walked through the kitchen without turning on the lights, fatigue weighing on his shoulders. All he wanted was a night's sleep without being interrupted by Ella's crying or his own nightmares. But then he stopped. In the corner of the living room, Clara was sitting on the floor. The faint moonlight from the window outlined her hunched silhouette, and in her hands, a small urn. Elias froze. Whatever she had been holding in her chest all these weeks threatened to break, because he knew what that meant. He knew exactly what it meant to hold the ashes of someone who was gone. He knew because he had one too. His feet moved before he could think. He crossed the room in slow steps and knelt in front of her. "Clara!" She didn't lift her head. Her shoulders trembled, and for a moment, Elias didn't just see Clara. He saw himself. "He should be here," her voice came out in a whisper. Elias swallowed hard. "I know." But Clara finally looked up. There was pain in her eyes, but also surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to understand. "You have one too, don't you?" Elias closed his eyes for an instant, then stood without a word and disappeared down the hall. When he returned, he was holding a small object. He sat down in front of her again and, with an almost reverent care, placed the urn in front of them both. "Lily," Clara said, confused. He sighed, running his fingers over the cold lid. "My wife's name." It was the first time Elias had said that name since the funeral, without feeling his chest tear. Clara looked at his urn, then at hers. "Yours was lost in childbirth. Mine never got to live." Elias nodded slowly. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. For the first time, there was no need to fill the void with words that would never be enough. And for the first time, Elias realized he was no longer alone in the darkness. The days that followed were different. Small gestures began to emerge between them, gestures that hadn't existed before. Elias started coming home earlier, without her asking. He spent more time with Ella, learning to hold her without feeling like she might break at any moment. Clara, for her part, began to wait for him for dinner, even if it was late. The dynamic changed. The pain still existed. The grief was still there. But now, they shared the weight. And when Elias looked at Clara, he no longer saw just an employee. He saw someone who was slowly bringing him back to life. The cold mountain breeze blew against their faces, but neither of them seemed to care. The sky stretched above them in a deep blue, and below, the immensity of the trees and valleys seemed small, distant. The altitude made the air seem purer, as if each breath was an attempt to cleanse what had been left behind. Elias held the urn firmly. The weight of the object in his hands was the same weight he had been carrying in his chest since the night he lost Lily. He had never had the courage to do this before, to bring symbolic closure to what held him prisoner in his pain. But now, standing there with Clara by his side, he knew he couldn't put it off any longer. Clara held hers as well, Her fingers trembled around the cold surface, as if a part of her still resisted the act of letting go. He looked at her sideways, noticing her held breath, her eyes fixed on the landscape as if searching for something on the horizon. "Ready?" Elias asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Clara hesitated, swallowing before she nodded. "I think so." It was a lie. Neither of them was truly ready. But perhaps they never would be, and waiting for the right moment would be the same as staying trapped. Elias took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and then opened the lid of the urn. The wind seemed to understand the solemnity of the moment, because it blew harder as the ashes began to float, mixing with the air and disappearing into the vastness below. Clara followed suit. They stood there, motionless, watching the last trace of their loved ones dissipate in the wind. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was a full silence, loaded with meanings that didn't need words. Elias felt his chest tighten, but for the first time, it wasn't just pain. There was a new lightness, a strange sensation that, although Lily would always be a part of him, he could finally move on. Then he looked at Clara. She wasn't crying, but her eyes were bright, her mouth slightly ajar, as if she were holding back a thought. "What is it?" he asked, watching her closely. She blinked several times before letting out a soft, humorless laugh. "I don't know. I think, for the first time, I don't feel alone." Elias felt something inside him change in that instant. He extended his hand, hesitant. Clara looked at him, then at his open hand, and without hesitation this time, she intertwined her fingers with his. And in that moment, without needing to say anything, they both knew they were starting to heal. Days passed, and with them, small changes began to happen. Clara's presence in the house was no longer just functional. She was no longer just the nanny, or the woman who helped with the baby. She was a point of balance, a silent but constant force. Elias began to notice the little things. The way Clara always hummed softly when she rocked Ella in her arms. How she would lean over the crib to whisper something to the baby before putting her down to sleep. The discreet care with which she folded his shirts when she did laundry, even though he had never asked. And then came the smiles. First, they were timid. A slight upward curl of a lip when she made a silly joke. A fleeting gleam in her eyes when he saw her playing with Ella in the living room. Then came the gestures. He started coming home earlier from work. At first, he told himself it was because he wanted to spend more time with his daughter. But he soon realized he was staying on the sofa longer than necessary, just watching Clara. And then, without even realizing it, he began to touch her more than he used to. Subtle touches. A brush of fingers when he took something from her hand. A light touch on her back when he passed her in the kitchen. A delicate adjustment of the blanket over her shoulders when he found her asleep on the sofa. And Clara never recoiled. It was on a random night, after an ordinary day, when something truly changed. Elias came home late, but for the first time, he didn't find Clara in the living room. The house was dark, silent. Only the faint light from the upstairs hallway indicated that someone was still awake. He climbed the stairs slowly, not knowing exactly what he was looking for, until he found her. Clara was sitting on the floor in the guest room she used, holding something on her lap. Elias frowned when he noticed the object in her hands. It was a small urn. He stopped in the doorway, his chest tight at the sight. "Clara," she didn't lift her head. "He never had a name." Elias felt something deep move within him. She took a deep breath, pressing the urn against her chest. "I never saw his face. I never heard him cry. I just felt him inside me, and then he was gone." Elias entered the room slowly, closing the door behind him. Clara finally lifted her eyes to him. There was so much pain there that he felt it as if it were his own. He knelt in front of her, not knowing exactly what to do, but knowing he had to be there. Then, with a slow movement, he reached into his pocket and took out something. A small urn, similar to hers. Clara's eyes widened. Lily? She understood without him having to explain. You still have her. He felt it. For a long time, it was the only thing I had left of her. I thought that if I got rid of this, I would be betraying her memory. She swallowed hard. But now? Elias looked at the small urn in his hands, and then at Clara. Now I know that holding on to this won't bring Lily back. Clara let out a shaky sigh, and a single tear rolled down her face. Elias did something he had never done before. He raised his hand and wiped the tear with the tip of his fingers. She closed her eyes for a moment, leaning slightly into the touch. And in that instant, he knew. The pain that separated them now connected them, and perhaps, without even realizing it, they were already starting something new. The rain was falling softly that afternoon, painting the sky a dense gray that seemed to weigh on the rooftops. The sound of the drops hitting the windows was the only noise inside the house, besides the gentle laughter of the baby, who was playing on the living room rug under Clara's watchful eye. Elias had left early, buried in work, and Clara took the opportunity to tidy up the house. In recent months, her presence there had become so natural that she hardly noticed how her routine was no longer just that of an employee. She knew exactly where Ella's clothes were, what mug Elias used for his coffee, and the music he liked to listen to when he came home late from the hospital. But that afternoon, the calm she so valued was interrupted by a sound that made her freeze. The metallic jingle of the doorknob turning. When the door opened, Elias's mother came in unceremoniously, as if she still lived there. Her impeccable coat was dry, protecting her from the rain, and her cold eyes swept the room until they rested on Clara and the baby. She stood there, in the doorway, just watching. Clara felt her heart tighten. "Mrs. Vance," she said, forcing a neutral tone. The woman advanced slowly, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. "What a lovely scene." Clara didn't reply. Elias's mother stopped in front of her, crossing her arms. "So it's true?" Clara blinked, not understanding. "What?" "That you're acting like you're this child's mother." The air seemed to leave the room. Clara felt the tension spread through her body. "I'm just taking care of her," she said, trying to stay calm. Elias's mother let out a short, contemptuous laugh. "Taking care of her," she repeated, as if testing the words in her mouth before spitting them out. "And when exactly did your job become this?" She gestured into the air, indicating the space between Clara and Ella, who was playing oblivious to the tension. "I never meant to cross any lines," Clara tried to argue. "But you did." Her voice was sharp, and Clara felt the blow like a slap. "This child has a mother," the woman continued, moving a little closer. "And that mother is not you." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara wanted to respond, but her throat closed up. The weight of that sentence crushed her in a way she was not prepared for. "Pack your things," Elias's mother ordered dryly, "and get out." Clara's breathing faltered. "Elias won't like this." "Elias is confused, but I see clearly what's happening." Clara's gaze shifted to Ella. The baby was smiling, holding a colorful toy, unaware of what was happening around her. And that's when Clara understood. She didn't belong there. It wasn't her house. It wasn't her daughter. With trembling fingers, she picked Ella up and hugged her for a long moment. The baby's sweet scent, the warm feeling against her chest, all of it made her heart break. Then, she took a deep breath, kissed the girl's forehead, and placed her back on the rug. Without another word, she went upstairs and began to pack her things. Elias came home late that night, exhausted. The day at the hospital had been long, but for some reason, he felt a strange weight in his chest, as if something were wrong. Upon entering the house, everything seemed the same at first glance, but when he looked at the sofa, he realized Clara wasn't there. His stomach twisted. He ran upstairs, heading for her room. The door was open. The closet was empty. The key was on the dresser. Reality hit him like a punch. She was gone. Elias's blood boiled. He ran downstairs and grabbed his phone. He dialed Clara's number, but it went straight to voicemail. His heart hammered in his chest. Damn it! Then he remembered the only other place she might be. The bar was crowded enough for the music and voices to become indistinguishable. Clara felt her throat burn with the bitter taste of the drink. The alcohol was going down too fast, but she didn't care. She wanted to forget, and that's how he found her. Elias walked into the bar, his eyes scanning the place frantically until they rested on her. She was sitting at the bar, a glass in front of her, and next to her, a man was sitting next to Clara, whispering something in her ear. She turned her face away, looking uncomfortable. Elias didn't need to see any more. He moved through the bar, feeling the blood pulsing in his temples. Clara! She looked up, surprised. But before she could say anything, the man next to her slowly turned around. Who are you? His voice was full of disdain. Elias barely looked at him. Let's go home, he said to Clara. She let out a dry laugh. I don't have a home. Those words hit him like a knife. The man next to her smiled. Looks like she's already made her choice, buddy. Elias couldn't hold back the impulse. The punch was quick and precise. The man stumbled backward, his glass skidding across the bar. Clara screamed, grabbing Elias's arm. What are you doing? He was breathing heavily, adrenaline coursing through his body. The terrified bartender grabbed the phone and called the police. Clara dragged Elias out before the situation got worse. The cold rain fell on them as soon as they left. She was trembling, whether from cold or anger. He couldn't tell. You can't just go around hitting people. He turned to her, his eyes blazing. And you can't just disappear without telling me anything? They looked at each other, their chests rising and falling rapidly. Why did you come looking for me? Clara asked, her voice low. Elias closed his eyes for a moment. When he looked at her again, his expression was no longer one of rage. Because you belong in my home. Clara blinked, surprised. The wind blew between them, and for an instant, everything was suspended. Just come with me, he said, almost in a whisper. We can talk tomorrow. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. Elias let out a heavy sigh, as if he had been holding his breath the entire time. And then, without another word, he took her back to his home. The rain had stopped, but the cold still lingered in the air when Elias parked the car in front of the house. The silence between him and Clara was charged with everything they hadn't said that night. She kept her gaze fixed on the window, her arms crossed over her chest as if trying to protect herself from something invisible. He didn't insist on breaking the silence. He simply got out of the car and went around to open her door. She hesitated before getting out. When she finally did, her eyes met his for an instant. And in that brief second, Elias saw confusion mixed with exhaustion. He saw that she was holding on by a thread. He took a deep breath and opened the door to the house, letting her in first. The atmosphere was quiet, strangely welcoming, as if her absence had left a void that was now being filled again. Clara slowly took off her shoes and walked toward the living room. Her gaze swept over the furniture, The small details she already knew so well. Everything was the same. But at the same time, everything seemed different. Elias watched her for a moment before speaking, in a low voice. "Can we talk tomorrow?" She nodded, without looking at him. "Yes." He didn't push it anymore. He simply went upstairs, leaving her there with her own thoughts. The next day brought a new beginning. Elias woke up early, but didn't find her in the house. His heart pounded for a moment, fearing she had left again. But then he saw a note on the kitchen table. "I went for a walk. I need to breathe." He exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Hours later, when he returned from the hospital, he found Clara in the living room, playing with Ella. The scene was so familiar that for a moment he felt a strange warmth in his chest, as if she had always been there, as if that was her place. And it was at that moment that his mother came in. Elias tensed immediately. He didn't know how Clara would react to seeing the woman who had kicked her out. But then, to his surprise, he saw something different in his mother's gaze. There was no coldness. There was no arrogance. There was regret. The woman took a deep breath and took a step forward. "Clara," she called, in a softer voice than Elias had ever heard. Clara slowly turned, standing up with Ella in her arms. "Mrs. Vance." The woman hesitated, then let out a heavy sigh. "I was cruel to you." The silence that followed was almost palpable. I was blinded by the pain of seeing my son suffer. I thought I was protecting Lily's memory, but in the end, I hurt the person who has done the most for him and my granddaughter. Clara said nothing. She just stood there, listening. Elias's mother swallowed hard, then forced a small smile. "I'd like to apologize, and I would like to spend some time with you. Just the two of us. A girls' day, as they call it." Elias's eyes widened. That, coming from his mother, was something he never imagined hearing. Clara blinked, surprised, and then looked at Ella, who was holding her finger with her small, chubby hand. And then she smiled. "I would love that." The next day brought a new version of Clara. She went out with Elias's mother in the morning and returned in the afternoon. But something about her was different. Her hair was slightly wavy, glistening under the soft evening light. Her makeup was delicate, highlighting her eyes and lips. The new dress hugged her figure in a way Elias had never seen before. He froze when he saw her. For an instant, he completely forgot what he was doing. Clara noticed his gaze and smiled, embarrassed. "We went to the mall," she said, as if she needed to justify it. Elias blinked several times before responding, but his voice came out a little hoarser than usual. "You look beautiful." A blush rose on Clara's cheeks, but before she could respond, Ella reached her arms out to her, and the moment was interrupted. Elias sighed and looked away, but something inside him had already changed. A few days later, he invited her to a dinner with his medical colleagues. "You don't have to accept if you don't want to," he said, trying to sound nonchalant. "But I would like you to go." Clara smiled sideways. "As your nanny or as your date?" He hesitated. "As Clara." She looked at him for a long moment before responding. Then she accepted. The night of the dinner, Elias was waiting in the living room when she came down the stairs, and for the second time, he forgot to breathe. The black dress hugged her curves elegantly, and the subtle glow of the makeup enhanced the depth of her eyes. But it wasn't just her appearance. It was the way she wore it all. The confidence, the softness. He couldn't help the smile that spread across his lips. "You look stunning." Clara laughed, looking down a little. "And you're exaggerating." He extended his hand. "Shall we?" She hesitated for a brief instant before accepting, and in that moment, Elias knew he was lost. But but life always found ways to interrupt moments like that. The next day, his mother was hospitalized. Elias stayed by her side the entire time, the memories of the hospital tormenting him in ways he didn't want to admit. It was Clara who showed up to relieve him. When he returned to the room, he found his mother holding Clara's hand, her eyes teary. "I was selfish," the woman murmured, "and I want to fix this." Then she took a ring off her finger and placed it in Clara's palm. "This has belonged to the family for generations. I want you to have it." Clara froze. Elias, watching the scene from the hallway, noticed her breathing falter. And then, as if something inside her had collapsed, she stood up quickly, her hands trembling. I can't accept this." And before anyone could stop her, she hurried out of the room, bumping into Elias in the hallway. He held her arms. "What happened?" Her eyes were glistening. "This is all wrong." "Clara." She closed her eyes, shaking her head, and then, without warning, the confession escaped her lips like a painful whisper. "I love you." Elias felt the world around him stop. He opened his mouth, but the words died before he could say them. "I love you too." She closed her eyes tightly. "You don't understand. I'm completely in love with you." And then, as if she couldn't bear to be there for another second, Clara turned and started to walk away. But Elias wouldn't let her go. He held her arm, pulling her toward him. She tried to resist, but he held her face with his hands, forcing her to look at him. "I'm in love with you too." And before either of them could doubt it, he kissed her. Time passed. The early morning was cold and silent, but inside Elias's car, everything seemed to burn. Clara gripped the seat tightly, her fingers digging into the upholstery as another violent contraction coursed through her body. Sweat fell from her forehead, and her breathing came in short, heavy gasps. "Hold on, love, we're almost there," Elias murmured, speeding down the deserted streets. She tried to laugh, but the sound came out more like a groan of pain. "I'm a doctor too, Elias. I know this baby isn't going to wait much longer." He gave her a worried look, the muscles in his jaw tense. "Then he better wait, because I'm not going to let you have this baby in the car." Clara closed her eyes for an instant, trying to control her breathing, but another strong contraction hit her, and an involuntary scream tore from her lips. Elias felt his heart drop. Never had the sound of her voice frightened him so much. Fortunately, the hospital appeared at the end of the street, and he pulled into the parking lot quickly. He didn't bother to park correctly. He got out of the car, opened her door, and bent down to help her. "Can you walk?" he asked, the concern evident in his voice. "I think so." She tried to get out of the car, but another contraction made her double over. Elias held her before she fell. "Forget that!" Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms and started walking quickly toward the hospital. "Dr. Vance!" One of the nurses at the reception desk's eyes widened when she saw him come in that way. "Delivery room. Now," he ordered. They didn't hesitate. Clara was placed in a wheelchair and quickly taken to the upper floor. Elias was by her side, holding her hand tightly. "It's going to be okay," he murmured, kissing her forehead. She smiled, exhausted. "I trust you." The delivery room was too bright, too cold, but Elias saw nothing but Clara. He was dressed in scrubs, the gloves tight, the mask on his face, but his eyes were fixed on the woman he loved, lying on the gurney, sweating, twisting in pain. "You're doing great, love. Just a little more," he encouraged, his voice low but full of emotion. She gritted her teeth, gripping the bed rail tightly. "Elias, if you say you're doing great one more time, I swear I'm going to throw a scalpel at your head." He laughed softly, feeling his chest tighten at the sight of her like this. "I know it hurts, Clara, but our son is almost here." She let out a choked cry as another contraction tore through her, and Elias felt the desperation begin to climb inside him. But then he saw the small body beginning to emerge. He felt the world around him disappear. "He's coming," he announced, his voice cracking. Clara was crying, exhausted, but she forced herself to push one last time. "Just one more, my love," he said, almost pleading. And then, with a final effort, Leo came into the world. The baby's cry filled the room. Elias blinked several times, his vision blurred with emotion, as he held his son in his arms for the first time. "My God," he murmured. He gently cleaned him and placed him on Clara's chest. She took a deep breath, feeling the baby against her, tears falling freely. "Hello, my love." Elias ran the back of his hand over his face, trying to hold back the emotion, but failing miserably. In that moment, he knew he would never be the same again. Hours later, the room door opened slowly, and small footsteps echoed on the floor. Ella, now 4 years old, came in holding her grandmother's hand, her eyes big and curious. "Dad?" Elias smiled and bent down to pick her up. "Come meet your little brother." She looked at Clara, who smiled drowsily in bed, holding Leo in her arms. "Is this my brother?" "Yes, my princess." Ella leaned forward, watching the baby with fascination. "He's so tiny." Clara laughed. "You were like that too when you were born." Ella frowned, then smiled. "Hello, Leo. I'm your big sister." Clara looked at Elias and held his hand. He smiled back. Because in that moment, surrounded by love, they knew they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Life is not always fair. Sometimes, it takes away what we love most, leaving us lost and without direction, making us feel like we will never be whole again. But in the midst of the pain, there is something that keeps us standing, that reminds us that moving on isn't about forgetting, but about transforming loss into strength and finding love. Love, whether romantic or familial, has the power to heal us, to fill the voids we thought were impossible to fill. It teaches us that, even after the greatest falls, we can still find a new beginning. If this story touched your heart, give it a like and share it so more people can feel this emotion. Thanks for being here and being a part of this moment. See you in the next video.